Lee Murphy.
And thank you, Mr. Patterson. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things briefly from your opening statement and from the testimony we've already heard today. Just on page 3 of your opening statement, when you talk about the central bank's mandate, part of it being to develop the financial services sector, and you say while the regulator legally had no similar responsibility, it was widely believed that its remit included supporting the development of the industry. So where did that belief come from?
It was written into the Central Bank and Financial Services Authority of Ireland Act, right? So SBIFSA, that horrible acronym, had it as a legal responsibility, and the financial regulator, even though it had its own act, operated under the aegis of the overall umbrella of SBIFSA. And I think that was the main reason why it was believed that the financial regulator also had that responsibility.
Was this discussed within the financial regulator?
Was it discussed as a policy that either we should or should not have this?
Yeah.
No, I think it was more assumed.
Assumed, okay.
Yeah.
So no conversations with the CEO about whether or not he should be spending time attending certain meetings or presentations?
I don't recall any of those conversations.
Okay. Thank you. Just further down on that page and responding to what Deputy McGrath raised with you in relation to your powers. So that first point there, that you had no powers per se of approval or disapproval over the bank's products like 100% mortgages. Did you have the power?
No, we didn't. It wasn't written into law that the banks had to come to us to have their products approved, because if that had been the case, there would have been a long queue. But my belief is that we could have curbed 100% mortgages by using other levers.
Levers through the banks in terms of...
Yes. In other words, what do I mean? We could have imposed additional, even more capital requirements than we did, although that would have run into some issues like the anti-competitiveness issue and so on. But we could have imposed more stringent capital requirements. We could perhaps have got at it through the consumer code, right? That it was inappropriate to be selling these 100% mortgages to certain classes of people. We could have attached conditions to banking licences that which effectively would have banned them.
Was any of this discussed at the time on the board or with the CEO?
No, not to my knowledge.
So was any level of attention given to this introduction of this new product, 100% mortgage?
Yeah, it was discussed. Now, at the time, the banks who were doing this tried to assure us that these products would only be sold to a very small minority of people for whom it was appropriate. Now, as we know now, that wasn't the case, but that was the assurance given at the time.
And despite the concerns that have already been referenced earlier in the proceedings over the increase in mortgage lending that was happening in the banks, as expressed in the 2004 Financial Services Report, Stability Report, you took those assurances?
At the time, yes.
Okay. And did you ever think to recommend to customers that they should not take on these mortgages?
I think you heard from Mary O'D yesterday that she and her team were quite strident in their advice to consumers that they have to be very careful in approaching a bank looking for 100% mortgages.
Okay, but it was never a move authorised by the board to say, go ahead and say to people, do not take these mortgages.
Well, Mary O'D would have discussed this at the board,
okay.
I believe, and the board would have supported that, yeah.
She didn't meet opposition at the board?
Sorry?
She didn't meet opposition at the board?
No.
Okay. No. Just moving on then to page 4, and it's in page 6 as well of your statement. You make 2 references to IT systems, and I'm just wondering, you talk about problems in the IT unit, and then later on you reference how these problems impacted upon your ability to conduct on-site inspections of the banks. Are we talking about a simple IT problem, or are you implying something else here in terms of cooperation from the central bank?
Got to be careful here, Chairman. There were significant problems in the central bank's IT unit, and the net result of that was that their responsiveness to the needs of the financial regulator, and in particular banking supervision, was inadequate. I'm trying to be very careful here.
Okay.
Because otherwise I'll end up naming names.
Okay. But the inadequacy then impacted upon the regulator's ability to conduct on-site inspections?
Yes.
And so what was the result of that then in terms of getting in more adequate systems or fixing the problems that you were encountering?
We tried a number of things. We developed MOUs between the regulator and the IT unit. I think the chief executive, what's the word I'm looking for, assigned a particular responsibility to one of the senior executives to pay close attention to this and to have regular meetings with IT to see how things were going. So those things were attempts to try and speed things up and to move it more quickly. But we were nevertheless a prisoner of the central bank's IT unit. We did not have the capability or the authority to go outside.
Okay. And did this ultimately lead to a lack of information as to the bank's individual levels of lending, credit quality, exposures when we come into the crisis periods?
It certainly impaired the banking supervision unit's ability to keep pace with that, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And at the same time, I mean, the data requirements for Basel II were just enormous.
Okay.
And all that was going on at the same time.
Okay. Just moving on then to compliance statements. On page 6 of your opening statement, and you talked about the Department of Finance getting involved and giving a clear signal that this did not have government support, your move to introduce compliance statements.
Yeah.
Did you need government support?
We certainly didn't need government resistance.
Can you elaborate on that?
I think it was believed in the authority at the time that the government actively did not want us to proceed with this. And that got expressed to us through the Department of Finance and this letter that they wrote saying, do not proceed with the consultation without coming back to us.
Thank you. Is that appropriate that they do that?
I guess if the government thinks that we're on the wrong track, they're entitled to express a view. And now, in fairness, the Department of Finance was quite careful in the way it structured this. You know, it said, we don't want you to proceed with the consultation, but by the way, you retain the right to impose this on individual institutions if you see fit.
Okay.
So they were reminding us that we still own the ball, you know.
Okay. And then just moving on then further on that page in relation to the Prudential Pact, and it's already been addressed, but that first paragraph under 2.5, you say the executive assured the authority that all these loans had strong asset backing.
Yes.
But was anyone checking in the financial regulator's office? Was anyone actually checking the quality of these assets?
I think that's one of the fundamental problems, that because the inspections were only focusing on process and not on content, that they weren't picking up the fact, and I think in some of the core documents there's the result of a themed inspection in, I think it is 2008.
It's the 5x5.
Yeah. Where they discovered late in the day that net worth statements were very flaky. They either didn't exist in some cases or they hadn't been independently verified. And that some of the tests that the banks were believed to be applying to loan requests weren't being applied. So in other words, the ground on which that was based was very shaky.
But
Just coming on a minute now, Deputy.
yeah, I'm just in the middle of the question. Thanks, sir. Just in relation to that process, though, because in that 5x5 exposure test that was done into the big developers, it was found in one of the tests that one of the banks, in terms of its calculations of an exposure to one individual borrower, was out by $1 billion. But it also noted that I'm paraphrasing here, that the significance of that wasn't understood by the regulatory system at the time.
Yes.
So it wasn't. Was there a knowledge gap as well in terms of understanding the asset quality?
I wasn't around for that particular bit of it. I'd gone by then. But yes, I think the answer to your question is yes. There must have been a knowledge gap.
Okay.
But I am surmising because I wasn't there.
Okay. Thank you. And then just a final question then in relation to your opening statement, and again it's on page 6 and it's in relation to the IFSC. Talking about sector limits that came up earlier. You talked about the central bank had effectively relaxed these limits in the 1990s, in particular to facilitate the arrival of one large foreign bank which had major sector exposures. It was then felt that foreign and domestic banks had to be treated the same in order to avoid giving substance to any impression that Ireland was host to an offshore centre that was being treated more lightly than its domestic banks. So what you're saying there is we relaxed the sector limits to attract in one particular bank, and as a result, in terms of, I suppose, looking for fairness, we then relaxed the limits for everyone else.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Okay. Do you think that's perhaps a perverse way to approach sector lending limits? That in order, to change the rules for one, so that they must then be weakened for everyone else?
I didn't say that the rules were changed, because the sector limits were still there and they were still subject to reporting and inspection, but they were relaxed. I think what happened, and this is way back in the 1990s, and I could stand corrected, I put this as my belief, that the approach was to relax the stringency of that for that reason, in order, as I say, to attract in a large foreign bank into the IFSC. With the benefit of hindsight, that was a bit crazy.
But if the result is that the standards are then relaxed for everyone else,
Questions, I have to move on.
doesn't that imply that there's a problem there, and it applies that not in hindsight?
Sorry, Deputy, I'm going to have to push you. You're out of time and you're out of questions. So you make your comment and I'm moving on.
I'm sorry, I couldn't get the question.
Sorry, I'll give it to you briefly there.
Thank you. If you're relaxing the sector limits,
Yes, for one bank.
for one bank,
Yeah.
and then as a result have to relax them for everyone else, doesn't that imply that? Doesn't that imply that you're approaching this the wrong way in terms of
Tail wagging the
regulation?
dog, in other words.
Excuse me?
The tail wagging the
Yes.
dog? Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah. I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, that was a crazy
At the time, though, and at the time, shouldn't that have been very obvious that the tail was wagging the dog?
I don't know, because I wasn't there then.
Right, thank you, Mr.